Recorded concurrently with the Rubber Soul album, but not released on that record, that was We Can Work It Out, of course, by the Beatles. Now, for the most part, the group didn't put their singles on their albums over in the UK, feeling that it wouldn't give their fans value for money. In fact, We Can Work It Out didn't appear on a British album until the Beatles' Collection of Oldies record came out in December of 1966. By the way, that song was for Ken, who wanted to hear something from that compilation. Well, in America, the U.S. distributor Capitol Records had no such ethical concerns and routinely sliced and diced Beatle albums to create shorter track listings and therefore more albums. In a way, first-generation American Beatle fans got a skewed version of the Beatles' development as recording artists. For example, the British Rubber Soul album and the American Rubber Soul album are similar, but two different animals. Well, every aspect of that album is explained and explored in a recent book called This Bird Has Flown, The Enduring Beauty of Rubber Soul 50 Years On, by our guest today, John Kruth. He's an author, musician, and music professor at the College of Mount St. Vincent in Riverdale, New York. John, welcome to the show, and I'd like to begin by discussing the Beatles' producer, George Martin, who passed away last week.
George Martin, beyond the Beatles with Jeff Beck and the little-known albums that he did with C-Train with Peter Rowan, those are such beautiful albums, you know, and I mean, the man had taste and a sense of humor and intelligence and vision.
Well, you know, there are different types of producers. I mean, someone like Phil Spector, for example, usually made everybody sound like Phil Spector, whereas George Martin was more of a guiding hand who would allow his artists to try new things and sometimes even indulge them.
Well, when you're dealing with visionaries like John Lennon and Paul McCartney and George Harrison and even Ringo Starr, I mean, really, the best thing to do is to serve, and I think he understood that. I think he understood that with the records that he made with Peter Sellers.
Yeah.
When you go and you listen to those, I mean, that's usually the best kind of producer, unless you're dealing with an artist that just doesn't have a clear shot at what it is that they want to do. And, you know, it's pretty obvious that the Beatles knew right where they were headed.
It's been a long time.
Going out to Rockin' Bob and Fairlawn. Originally recorded for the Help album in June of 1965, rejected in favor of stronger material, and then dusted off and given some overdubs in late 1965, when the group found themselves short of material for the Rubber Soul album. From side 2 of Rubber Soul, that was Wait, by the Beatles. I know Rubber Soul is thought of as a transitional album for the group, but in a way, it really starts with the Help album, doesn't it? And songs like You've Got to Hide Your Love Away and Yesterday, which was on the British version of Help.
Yesterday's really where it all began, as far as like let's throw down something with some real feeling in it, other than these little plays about boy meets girl and loses girl and all of that. I mean, it's like they really started to show some kind of Paul, wow, what a beautiful song that was. What a stunner, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, how many people have recorded Yesterday? And it just showed, and maybe it was Dylan, I'm not sure. You know, they were, as they said, potty over Dylan. They were crazy for Dylan, and Dylan was really saying something. If you listen to, just about anything he was doing from the beginning on, I mean, he was so far ahead of everybody else lyrically. And they were probably just waking up to, oh, that's okay, you can put that in a song, you can say that. Even George has like a bit of a put down in, think for yourself. Although your mind's opaque, try thinking more for your own sake.
Right.
Wow, they had all been about love and holding hands and being so sweet and everything up to that point.
Well, let's hear the Beatles on November 8th, 1965, in the studio trying to work out the harmonies for Think for Yourself, and then we'll segue into the finished track. We're talking to author John Kruth. His book is This Bird Has Flown, The Enduring Beauty of Rubber Soul, 50 Years On. If you were to pick up this book, ladies and gentlemen, and just assume, well, this is only about the album, I want a little more than that, don't fret, because this book is so much more than that. In fact, it takes in the entirety of the Beatles' career and their solo years, using Rubber Soul as the jumping-off point, right?
You know, I'm trying to get the whole picture and a portrait. I'm a portrait painter, and I like to use language and color and all of that to get the feeling of what is going on there, you know. There are other guys that could probably tell you what kind of strings they used and what kind of amps and all of this and that. And hey, that's very nice. But for me, it was always about the feeling and what was influencing them and what was happening all around them, and then how they influenced everybody else, people like Al Cooper and John Sebastian and the Byrds and the Turtles and a lot of the different people that I talked to, Felix Cavallari from the Rascals. And, you know, what were you doing before you heard this record? What were you doing after, you know, you heard this record? And as Felix put it, you know, if you listen to Groovin' by the Rascals, you'll hear the influence of Rubber Soul in there. Everybody's all of a sudden got a lot hipper after Rubber Soul came out, because it was really the game changer. I mean, people will argue and say, oh, Revolver is really the masterpiece and really the great album, and it is. It's a brilliant, incredible album. There's no sense in comparing the two, but this is where it all starts.
Now, you mentioned comparing records, and as I stated at the top of this conversation, the American Rubber Soul is a different listening experience than the British Rubber Soul. Now, they're both great, but do you have a preference?
I can't answer that because you're talking about, I've just seen a Face versus Drive My Car.
Right.
The difference is one of them has more songs on it. How's that? You know, you get more on the English record, so how's that? I mean, it's like, I can't go into that because it's like, at that period, at that point, everything they were doing to me was quite fabulous. Run for Your Life is a little problematic. I mean, you know, John's kind of bitter, he's spitting some real bitterness there. That's, you know, but he liked to push people's buttons, so that's probably where that was coming from. And besides, he just stole the line anyway from Elvis from Let's Play House.
That was take 2 of Norwegian Wood, and a very different take of Run for Your Life, take 5. Before that, right here on the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop, our guest is author John Kruth. His book, This Bird Has Flown, The Enduring Beauty of Rubber Soul, 50 years on. In your book, you talk about how Rubber Soul was a smash album, a game changer for popular music. Tell us a little more about that.
I teach a couple of histories of rock and roll. I've been teaching college for 10 years now. And in the book and in part of my class, I talk about George Harrison picks up a sitar. Well, bingo, there you go. It was just like we had the British invasion 6 months, 1 year earlier, and then all of a sudden we've got the Indian invasion. Everybody suddenly is picking up the sitar, learning how to meditate, becoming vegetarian, chanting Hare Krishna, whatever it was, whatever the Beatles got into, everybody followed, even those Rolling Stones 6 months later.
That's true. Yeah. Lennon would often complain about that.
Yeah.
Point that out.
Yeah. I mean, I love the Stones, don't get me wrong, and I love a lot of other music, too. But it affected everybody. Brian Jones, you know, picks up the sitar for Paint It Black. Brian Wilson makes Pet Sounds, which then, of course, influences the Beatles to make Revolver and Pepper. And they go back and forth with Smile and Pepper and all of that. It's really beautiful and really great that way. It's almost the way that, like, sampling came in later on. It was like, oh, yeah, you know, okay, this is where they're at, and we'll grab a little bit of this and throw it in there. I mean, the Byrds were just one big sonic cocktail of, like, they could, you know, let's take Dylan's songs and Beatleize them, and then, you know, look a little bit like the Beatles, and bang, they went right to the top of the charts, and suddenly America had their answer to the Beatles, because, hey, we were caught with our pants down, man. It's amazing. You know who I think it didn't affect probably was Dylan.
Yeah.
You know, Dylan was affected earlier. You know, when he played Newport, he was affected earlier when he was wearing his Beatle boots and all of that. But you know, he didn't follow that. He he could never answer for Bob.
It's interesting though that Lennon was the biggest devotee of Dylan, and Dylan winds up being more friendly with George.
Yeah. Right? Do you remember seeing what is that film, Eat That Document?
Eat the Document, yeah.
Yeah, which they're in the car together, and it's like, wow, this is really awkward. This isn't fun. This is kind of,
Yeah, they don't have any chemistry at all,
right?
Whereas George and Dylan did.
Well, George, I think, was probably, there was a little bit more room there for, people to hang out.
Yeah, it's true. When you think about how the music industry operated in the 60s compared to today, for example, people put out an album every 3 years. In the 60s, it was like every 3 months. I mean, every month during the 60s is like a year today.
Yeah.
It's the
when
accelerated
pace. When you think of the
pace.
conveyor belt that these guys were on, how many singles did they have to crank out a year, and how many LPs? And then they had the Christmas message on top of that, and then they had a tour. I mean, the conveyor belt. Oh, no wonder so many of these guys died young.
Right.
Then not only that, but they didn't know what the drugs were that they were, swallowing and all of that. But the conveyor belt is incredible, and here, the beautiful thing about that pressure was that how well the Beatles responded under that pressure. Because if you think that, Help had just come out earlier in '65, and then it's followed by Rubber Soul that December, and then by June, July, whatever it was, they have already made Revolver of '66. Yeah. Hats off to the lads, from Liverpool. They were amazing, and a lot of people put them down. Even Lou Reed put them down in recent years. I was so surprised to see that, and it was like, oh, come on! It's just like, if you're not into the music, fine, but you've got to respect it. Look, I love music of all kinds. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's inventive and well done and has heart, and you can groove to it.
Let me mention some of the other books you've written.
Yeah.
Rhapsody in Black, The Life and Music of Roy Orbison.
That was quite a ride and quite a challenge. I mean, Roy's life was all about, transcendence through darkness, and it was all about taking the dark and making it into this beautiful, art, and all that pain that he went through and all the tragedy that he went through in his life, and how, he could still manage to go on and sing. How heroic, Olympian.
And To Live's to Fly, the ballad of the late, great Townes Van Zandt.
Another guy who was a wonderful poet that most people don't know anything about, but a poet on the level, to me, as a songwriter, that you can compare to Leonard Cohen, Bob Dylan, and Neil Young, just off the top of my head. And most people will go, well, who's that? But Willie Nelson knows. I mean, Lou Harris knows. A lot of people knew. Bob Dylan even did Poncho and Lefty. And Merle Haggard, a lot of people covered Townes' stuff. He was the heart and soul of the Austin music scene, really was. And I guess, I was kind of on a mission there to get Townes some props,
right.
Because, and what a great guitar player. Most people don't realize, he took guitar lessons from Lightnin' Hopkins, and he was very well read. He knew his poetry, was deep into Robert Frost and Shelley and all of the great classic poets.
Once again, the book is called This Bird Has Flown, The Enduring Beauty of Rubber Soul, 50 years on. We're going to be running out of time here, but I should mention it's published by Backbeat Books, and one could go to backbeatbooks. Try saying that 3 times fast. Backbeatbooks.com and find out more info, and I'm sure you can get the book at Amazon.com and at fine bookstores everywhere.
Wherever you can find a bookstore these days.
Yeah, that's true. Well, hey, how can people catch up with you?
Well, I'm at johnkruth.com. I have a 9-piece band called Tribeca Stan. It's a world music band that plays around New York City, and we tour the country and sometimes Europe when things are going well. And I do a bit of singer-songwriter work myself, and so I'm around. I'm in New York, johnkruth.com. You'll find me there. I'm on Facebook, all of that.
All right. Well, thanks so much, John. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ghosty. It was a real pleasure.
And have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.